but I actually think that you deserve more than just a round of applause. I think you actually deserve a chance at a prize. So I'm going to introduce my good friend Sean Casey, who's with the Silicon Valley Space Center, who's going to speak for a moment or two about a new effort that we're starting up here in Silicon Valley that we hope all of you will want to become involved with. So Sean, if you could come up and give a speech and maybe tell us where you got that shirt.
Absolutely. So aside from wearing another hat, I'm also wearing another shirt. This is actually what entrepreneurs in Ghana wear. I do a stint over at Clara University Global Social Benefit Incubator. They bring in companies from around the globe, and this is one of the entrepreneurs that makes paper products out of banana pseudostems. So I was thinking, I was involved in a startup, and all I got was this T-shirt. But aside from that, as John mentioned, we have a new group here in the Bay Area. It's the Society of Satellite Professionals International. It's a well-known international organization with chapters all around the United States and also abroad in the UK and Europe. And so today, this summer, we're opening a Silicon Valley chapter, and I would encourage everyone that's here that's in Silicon Valley to join, and certainly everyone that's here at this meeting to consider joining the SSPI. If you go to sspi.org, get a membership. Here in Silicon Valley, we're going to do a number of events. We've got events scheduled for September and December. We also are working on building our scholarship fund. So if you're a corporate entity, I would encourage you to come talk to me about SSPI and corporate memberships. And with that, we're also going to have a February event over at Hogan Lovells, and John can tell you a little bit more about that at the right time. So that being said, come talk to me about SSPI, the program, and what I have is a fishbowl with business cards in it, and we're going to pass this around, and if you're interested, our prize is going to be a Arduino module from our friends at Spire. This is an ArduSat module kit. It's got all the sensors in it associated with ArduSat, so this is going to be our prize. So even if you'd like to take this home and use it somewhere else, that's okay as well, but we'll pass the fishbowl around and you can throw your business cards in there, and then I guess at the end of the event we'll do a drawing.
Yes, so that's our hook. We're going to keep you here till the end to do the drawing, so if you want to wake up at that time, feel free to do so. So, I was trying to think about how to introduce this topic, risk and opportunity, and I was thinking that an alternative title, NewSpace meets Chinese philosophy. And you're probably scratching your head and thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? Well, consider the following definition. In Chinese philosophy, yin-yang describes how apparently opposite or contrary forces are actually complementary, interconnected, and interdependent in the natural world, and how they give rise to each other as they interrelate to one another. So before you today is a distinguished group of panelists that will present their views on how these seemingly opposing considerations of risk and opportunity are shaping NewSpace, and how individual entrepreneurs can find their own appropriate balance between risk and opportunity. So it is in this context that I have the pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, Carissa Christensen is a co-founder and managing partner of the Tari Group, a space and defense consulting firm based in Alexandria, Virginia. She is a leading business and technology strategy consultant in the space and satellite industry and is a sought-after speaker and author. She also advises several companies she has helped seed and serves as the chair of the board of QX Branch, a quantum computing software and analytics startup. Next, feel free to give your applause. All right. Next, we have Bill Haldeman with Planet Labs. Ben works in strategy and launch at Planet Labs. Ben led the design of the instrument payload used on Planet's imaging satellites and has flown approximately 100 payloads in space. Prior to Planet, Ben created the first global robotic telescope network at the Las Cumbres Observatory Global Telescope Network. This network enabled persistent tasking of the night. Chris Kunstatter is a Senior Vice President of XL Catlin and manages XL's space insurance portfolio. He is actively involved in all aspects of XL's space business, including technical, financial, and actuarial analysis, policy wording construction, claims handling, and business development. Chris is a leader in promoting risk management awareness in the space industry, being involved with numerous failure review boards for satellites and launch vehicles, as well as developing and exploiting satellite salvage opportunities. In addition, he has worked closely with satellite operators, launch providers, and government agencies to enhance industry understanding of space situational awareness issues. Let's give a hand for Chris. And last but not least, Kevin Peterson. Kevin Peterson manages Astrobotics, technology development and strategy. Kevin has fielded a dozen autonomous land, air, and sea. His vehicles pilot themselves autonomously over rugged desert roads, through traffic, and for months on the ocean. Kevin was the technical lead for Carnegie Mellon's DARPA Grand Challenge teams. At Astrobotic, Kevin is the architect of the Griffin lunar lander and leads the decision-making that balances risk and reward in technical development. Thank you to all our panelists for being here. Before we get started with the Q&A, I'd just like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to say in their own words a few things about what they're doing, what drives them, and what they see as exciting opportunities and risks in the new space industry. We can start with you, Carissa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, John. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. This really is commitment, as John said, Saturday afternoon after lunch. And it's a fantastic topic. In thinking about risk and opportunity, I think the place that I start is with my sense that, as John said, think about what you want to say about yourself. And I thought, well, gosh, you know, I'm an entrepreneur in this community. It's so ingrained in my experience and the space industry, starting a company and doing that job, that I tend to focus more on what the job is. But there is risk and opportunity is certainly at the core of making that decision. I'll say that I generally subscribe to the idea that entrepreneurs are not necessarily more risk-seeking than other people, but that they are deeply knowledgeable about a topic, an area, a capability, an opportunity, a market, and that depth of knowledge enables them to be confident that they can provide a service or a product or engage in an industry in a way that will make them more successful than others. There's also a little bit of ego involved in that, but I do think that's a very interesting construct. So my day job, what I do at the Torrey Group is I analyze the industry. My job is to understand what's going on, to research and collect data, to look at it with objectivity and with rigor, and to provide insight into what's happening. And one of the lenses that I've always used for that from the beginning of my career, which was very close to some of Jim's policy discussion, although I was trying to look like I didn't know what he was talking about. What policies? But I lived through most of those policies. So the lens has been the lens of commercial space. And commercial space used to mean the Office of Commercial Space at NASA spent a lot of time deciding what their pricing policy for the many companies that wanted to use space station was going to be. That was the kind of big issue that we were grappling with at the time. Spoiler alert, there were hardly any. But it was clear at that point, and now is the culmination of that industry and companies and entrepreneurship was going to have an enormous effect on the way the space industry played out. And so there are three trends that affect risk and opportunity right now that I wanted to sort of highlight. And the first one is very obvious to everybody in this room, but I think it has some interesting nuances, and that is increased participation by high visibility, high net worth individuals, the Space Billionaires Club. So there's an obvious benefit of that or impact of that, which is that those deeper pockets reduce the risk of running out of money or running out of runway. Interestingly, I think there's another layer, which is that the previous successes of those entrepreneurs, and they typically have not been people who have made money in space, Those previous business successes carry credibility, and I think really importantly, they shape the media response and the media coverage and the public response to those individuals and to those businesses. So there's already a difference from someone who's identified with the space industry starting a company and someone who's identified with, for example, Amazon or PayPal. And I think the consequences of that is that their involvement has begun to change the view of space investment as being something that's unique, that's highly uncertain, and that's not relevant to most people. I think that's changing into the idea that, and through the active engagement of people like Elon Musk, that investment in space is socially important, that it has the potential to be world-changing, and that it's of interest to many people. The second trend that I'd point to that I think really is changing the risk and opportunity equation is the changing nature of space entrepreneurs and space ventures, particularly due to the new methods of using data, of generating value from data, and of deploying analytics. And so you're moving from large, exquisite space systems to smaller systems, such as those represented by companies like Planet Labs and Skybox, as an example, or the Earth sensing companies that are looking at weather, like companies like Spire. And those companies are very different in terms of their capital requirements. They just cost a lot less to deploy and to operate. And so that attracts a different set of investors. I've said this before, I spent a lot of time recently doing interviews with investors in Silicon Valley for a project that we're doing to try to understand why they're investing. And this is a bit of an overstatement, but you'll sit in a room and someone will say, well, you know, in Silicon Valley, we don't worry about money. We have plenty of money. What we're looking for is the right team and the right opportunity and the right business model. And they'll say, we're just not worried about putting together the capital. We can write a check for $20 or $30 million. And as a space person, you think, well, you could buy a study. You know, $20 or $30 million is not a meaningful number in the space industry as I have grown up in it. But it is a very meaningful number for a company that is deploying a global network of CubeSats, for example. So those investors are entering the market. And then I think the third trend is that there is broadly growing institutional support for space entrepreneurs. As I said, interested in Silicon Valley and among venture capitalists globally. US government policies, budget pressures are aligning to open doors to more innovative acquisition, and we've certainly seen that with military acquisition of satellite capacity, although that was not so much budget pressures, it's just sheer lack of capability and driving need. But we also see NASA's acquisition of SpaceX and other commercial services. And then other national governments are also starting to look at space as an economic growth engine. Point to one that's, I think, very interesting right now. The United Kingdom has identified space as a source of economic growth and is funding space accelerators and space activities at a level that's completely unprecedented in that nation. So I think the result is more investment and more space ventures. Exciting time. With three caveats. There are challenges. In one of the interviews that I did, there was a great, very nuanced quote: space companies are badly managed. Now, I think that's a little bit of an overstatement, but I do think that that is still a concern of investors. Timelines are long. We're seeing that with Virgin. We're seeing that with other companies. And there's also some anticipated contraction in capital markets in the next 5 minutes, 6 months, 12 months. There's a lot of concern and anxiety around that in the investment community. And particularly for the larger of small space ventures, a contraction in capital could be a problem. So that's my sort of fight I think is going on, and I'm really looking forward to hearing questions.
Thank you. So my name is Ben. I've been at Planet Labs for about 2.5 years now, and we've been a very fast-growing startup in the space industry. I joined when we were about 20 people. Now we're about 120 to 150, and we just acquired a company which is another 100 or so. So it's been we've taken this approach of very fast-moving, high risk, and kind of reinventing a lot of the rules that traditionally space has taken for granted. So we had to relearn how to build satellites and take a very aggressive schedule and book launches regularly. And those were milestones along the way for us to continue to develop at a fast pace and to have delivery dates where we needed to deliver something in several months from now. And it really forced us to figure out what risks we were willing to take, how we wanted to build satellites iteratively and take that approach. So we took more the approach of, okay, first you have to get communications right, because if you put something up there and you can't talk to it, then you won't learn from that. So first we wanted communications right, then we wanted to get duty cycles up and do more processing in space. Finally, we wanted to get good image quality, get higher numbers of pictures down. And originally, early on, we had a lot of instances where we were redesigning satellites in the last month before shipping those, and getting all the testing done, and spending very late nights and working every day to get those satellites in space. And that was kind of our early on, fast-moving, risk approach. And now, as we've grown and matured and separated our manufacturing from our team that does design and our team that does launch, we've really been able to start decoupling those risks and have a certain launch schedule of when we're launching, and then have certain rollout schedules of releasing new hardware and decoupling those, so we fly whatever's ready at the time, but are able to not have to be taking those risks in the last month before shipping a new version of a satellite. And then additionally, we've really tried to work on our launch strategy, because launch and regulatory has been one of our biggest risks at Planet. And launches slip. We've suffered 2 launch failures already, which has been rather unlucky. And fortunately, we have a business model, and we've been able to move through those. And our launch approach has been to diversify across many different launch vehicles, not rely as much on insurance, and also diversify for geopolitical risk and launch out of several different countries. So really trying to take risks in our own control and to spread those across lots of different opportunities. And then also one of our biggest risks was moving slow. So having the financing ready and able to raise more financing based on the progress we make, and using that traditional venture capitalist model within space was somewhat unique. And then now, as we're moving more towards operational constellations, then some of the traditional ways you do business in space might start to apply to us as well. Though we also want to continue to maintain the agility and the new approaches that have gotten us to where we are. So thank you, everyone, and excited to be here.
All right. My name is Chris Kunstadter. I'm with XL Catlin, an insurance company. I'm based in New York. We were XL Group first when we merged with another insurance company called Catlin. And we are now one of the largest participants in the space insurance market. We've always been a leader in that market, and with the addition of the Catlin team and the Catlin capacity, we're a major force in the market. I myself have been with XL for 9 years. I've been in the space insurance business for 31 years. So I've seen a lot of rockets and satellites come and go. When I graduated from UC Santa Cruz in 1977, this all around here, there was no Silicon Valley. Just wasn't there. It was TI, IBM, HP, and that was about it. And I left California in 1982. There was a little bit more, and of course, by the late 80s, it had grown immensely. The amazing thing is, here we are almost 40 years later, and Silicon Valley is still the heart of so much innovation, and we don't see any stopping of that, whether it's in computers or whether it's in space or any other field associated with that. So we love this field. Space insurance is actually a very exciting type of insurance. I wouldn't be in insurance if I wasn't in space insurance. It's really a lot of fun. We see new business models, new hardware, new technologies every day of the week. Carissa mentioned the difference now that the money is different. When Orbital Sciences started up back in the late 80s, we bought in. We jumped right in. We insured them from their very first launches of the Pegasus and the transfer orbit stage. And we worked with them very closely. That was a have the funding that a lot of the startups have now here in the Valley. It was a company that was really relying on things like government contracts. And that was the model then, and it worked. And Orbital is now a very strong, very large, Orbital ATK is now a very large and strong company. And we're very proud to continue to be their leading insurer. Likewise, Ben was mentioning the activities of his company. We've been we've been the lead insurer for Planet Labs for as long as they've been launching satellites. And again, proud to do it. We also have a very strong relationship as a lead insurer with NanoRacks, with EarthCast, with a lot of the other companies around here. Of course, we still insure the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the Thaleses, the Airbuses, Russian, Chinese companies in the aerospace field, and so large or small, we're involved with it. Space is not a big industry as far as the number of insured events goes, so the typical insurance model of the law of large numbers doesn't apply. It's a very volatile business and does not appeal to the vast majority of insurance companies in the world. There are only 40 companies in the world that write space insurance. So it's a very small market, and it's built on relationships. It's built on understanding not just the technology, but the business plan and the people behind it. So, when we talk about risk and when we talk about the amount of risk that a company is willing to take, interesting to us from the outside. The insurance industry tends to be reactive rather than proactive. We don't define the specifications, we don't define the business plan, the con-ops, anything like that for space systems. We react to it, and the way we react to it was with the pricing of our insurance policies. And good intentions will get you only so far, because whether you have a large $500 million satellite or a $500,000 CubeSat, the rocket doesn't know what it's carrying. And if the rocket's going to fail, it's going to fail when it decides to fail with either the large or the small satellite on board. So there are certain elements of risk that are constant throughout our business. And I certainly don't point to any particular company or launch vehicle or satellite or anything like that. But there are certain elements of our business that are purely based on hardware, that are purely based on design, on manufacturing, on testing, and that. So we certainly recognize that the world today has shifted, where our business was 95% geocommunications satellites for as long as I had been in the business. For the last 10 years now, LEO satellites, imaging satellites, other applications and technologies are much stronger in our business. And we're excited to see that, and it's important for us to understand the technologies. But it's also important for our clients to understand what it is we offer. So we insure from ignition of the rocket onwards. We take virtually all the technical risk from ignition onwards. Insurance is typically the third largest program cost after the spacecraft and the launch. And so it's a very important element of the program. It's very important to get it right and to understand what it does and what it doesn't do. Our policies cover all risks. We cover if a meteorite hits your satellite. We cover if a solar flare affects your satellite. We cover if your satellite hits another satellite. We cover it. Everything's covered except those few things that are excluded. So it's a very broad coverage. Well, and as with your homeowners and your automobile insurance, we exclude war, we exclude nuclear, we exclude terrorism, and virtually nothing else beyond that. So there is a market, though, for those coverages. So new technologies don't bother us. New technologies don't worry us. We like new technologies. New technologies represent progress. They represent innovation. They represent the future. And we can't shy away from that. What we make sure of is that the elements of risk that we insure are properly qualified. Qualification is the key to a successful space program. You can't just have a great design, have a great idea. It's in the execution and in the qualification. And making sure that the entire scope of the risk from ignition of that rocket onwards is understood and qualified. So, you know, it's a fun business. I look forward to discussing this with my fellow panelists today, and that's it. Thank you.
I'm Kevin Peterson. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Astrobotic Technology. Astrobotic, a lunar delivery company, and so there's plenty of risk that goes along with that. It's easy to think about the technical risks associated with landing on the moon. We start with launch, and then after launch, the vehicle's a satellite. After that, we capture, we descend, we get close to the surface, and that's where it really heats up. We have to touch down safely, and fundamentally, what we do is provide a service to deliver payloads to the surface of the moon. So it's easy to look at those technical risks and say, oh man, that's tough, but I think those risks are manageable, and the key to risk and the key to getting past those challenges and getting to the opportunity that sits on the other side is appropriately analyzing what the risks are, looking at them ahead of time, understanding how you need to qualify and design a program ultimately that gets you to the technical goal. What I think is interesting about what we're doing is that there's actually another risk associated with lunar delivery, and that is what I call a credibility gap. So for a small company to go out and say, okay, we're going to do something that nations basically only nations have done in the past, raises eyebrows. People don't even believe that that's a service that could exist. When we go out and we talk to potential, they say, first, who are you? Second, really, you can technically do this? And third, okay, now I'm going to start thinking about what I could purchase, what the real market is, and that gap is our real risk. The challenge for us is to overcome that credibility gap and to find the early adopters who are willing to take the risk with us to land on the moon. And I fundamentally believe that that is the key challenge to innovation. In my previous life as a robotic car designer, I developed the first vehicles that could drive in traffic. I was part of Carnegie Mellon's DARPA Urban Challenge to Google and to Caterpillar and to a whole bunch of different companies. And that process took about 3 years. And at the beginning, nobody really believed that cars could drive themselves. And I would say that the general public these days still doesn't really believe cars can drive themselves, but I'll tell you that they can. In a period of 3 years, we went from a bunch of disparate research projects to a point where cars could drive themselves. Companies like Google believed in it, and they carried it forward. And what happened there is not a technological development, it's a development in the understanding of the risk associated with those vehicles and whether or not that technical development could succeed. And fundamentally, I believe that lunar landing is in the same place. So far, countries have done it. It's been very expensive. It's been a large portion of national budgets for a decade when Apollo was the way it was done. It's still called a moonshot. It's a pretty significant thing. Fundamentally, the technology is there. The key is to push the market so that the market understands where we're coming from, to leverage all of the things that have occurred up to this point, and then convince everyone that the risk actually is low. And so I'm looking forward to talking about those risks and the opportunity to change the world by landing on the moon, and to change the world by doing things like what Planet Labs is doing, changing the paradigm, changing what the costs are, changing how regular we get out of space. So, thanks.
Thanks to all our panelists for some great opening remarks and insights. Before I ask my first question, I want to let everyone in the audience know, feel free to come up at any time during this presentation. We've got 2 mics up at the front here, so we want to keep this interactive. We want to get your insights from the audience, and make this as much of a back and forth dialogue for this last session. So again, don't be shy, and as the program goes on. But just so by nature, I'm an attorney, so I have to go back to semantics, and I want to step back, because this is NewSpace 2015. We hear that term NewSpace all the time, and I want to get each of your thoughts on, well, what do we mean? How would you define it? How much significance do you ascribe to the term? And does it reflect a break point in thinking about risk and opportunity? So whoever wants to start, feel free to jump in.
If we're going to talk semantic analysis and the impact of words on the polity, I'm there. I think new space is an evolvingly the usefulness of the term is evolving. I think new space, when the term originally started floating, was profoundly useful as an organizing principle and term around which people could coalesce, like space access can be far cheaper, that there is truly an opportunity for companies to participate in ambitious space ventures, that space entrepreneurs can have a very different look and feel, as we're seeing on the stage today, than they have in the past. And so I think that it was very powerful in helping to shape how people think, what the industry looks like, and who the participants are. I think at the moment it's of modest value, in my view, and I think that it is moving toward having negative value in that, and I'm overstating a little bit, but in that it is starting to be an us-them in a way that's not productive, as opposed to, I think there's a time to say, let's declare victory. Let's recognize that the dynamics of the marketplace, that every single massive space company that you can think of is looking at small satellite systems, is looking at reducing the cost to launch, is looking at changing, at incorporating innovation into what it does, is looking at changing its business model out of, with the sense that competition is changing. That's fantastic. That's enormously positive. And I think that we in the industry benefit from that kind of change. So I think there's a very distinctive evolution in the value of the term, and I think that we're going to be looking for the next term that reflects that positive evolution of the industry in the direction it's moving in.
Any suggestions from the panel on the next term? What's the Sure.
You know, one thing I'll say about, I agree totally with what Carissa just said, and I'll add to it, though, that one of the things that we see as a difference between the companies that are typically grouped under NewSpace and those that aren't is that a lot of the newer companies, the newer entrants in the field, are not driven by the market. They're creating, they're using innovation to discover new applications, whereas the shall we say, traditional companies, while they may be large, bureaucratic, hierarchical, whatever, they do have the ability to adapt. You look at someone like Boeing with electric propulsion. Introducing electric propulsion to their satellites was quite a revolutionary idea. It was a complete game changer for the satellite market. It developed a new class of satellites that companies could use. It's a traditional aerospace company, but they were able to react to the market, to the mission. So rather than creating new markets, they're responding to customer demand. So I think, you know, if you want to draw any distinction, maybe that's one distinction you can draw. But I do agree with Carissa that maybe it's time to put that away. Back when we started dealing with Orbital in 1988, space company, we didn't know it at the time, but that's what they were. So
to me, NewSpace represents a little bit of a entrepreneurial mindset, right? And there's nothing fundamental about that mindset that sets old space apart from new space companies. What is unique right now is that you have very large established companies, established organizations that have been doing things in a particular way for a very long time. And now costs are coming down and people are starting small companies that can do interesting new things, and that's the kind of economy and cycle that has occurred in the rest of industry for a long time. What's unique right now, in my opinion, is space.
Agreed with all those comments. And I think the entire space industry is learning that there are new approaches that can be effective, new approaches to funding, new approaches to risk, and new approaches to building spacecraft and operating those. And so I think we'll continue to see that progress and continue to see new companies come in with new innovative business models, and then continue to see traditional companies adapt and take new approaches.
So as we see this convergence between, you know, what, for lack of a better term, we've called traditional space and new space, I mean, when this convergence comes, who are the players, and you don't have to name companies, but who are the types of players, the types of companies that you see as having the greatest opportunity to profit from this coming convergence? Any thoughts from the panel on, is it traditional aerospace? Are they media companies? Is it the yet unknown emerging company that is working in their garage somewhere? Who are going to be reaping the rewards in this convergence?
As I said, 95% of our business used to be geocomsats. Now we're seeing a lot in the Earth observation market. The EO market is fascinating to watch because virtually twice a month there's a new company that's entering the EO market. And some of them have, like Planet Labs, have constellations of many satellites. Some have 1 or 2 satellites that they're planning on sending up. If I knew, obviously, which ones were going to be successful, I'd know where to put my money. But even beyond that, it's going to be interesting to watch their approach to not just technology. I mean, technology kind of goes without saying, but really watching their approach to risk, not just technical risk, but really the business risk. Where's the market? What's the differentiator? How are they going to make sure that their costs are competitive and that sort of thing? So I think it's It's that sort of business approach. I don't know who's going to win in the EO market. And some companies are going to win and some companies are going to lose. And it's fascinating to watch almost as an academic exercise. And it'll be a great case study at some point in the future.
I have a very unambiguous answer. The people who are going to make the money are the people who provide value, and it's a fascinating industry at $6 billion. Ground segment, terminals and dishes, and that's 60 billion, 10 times as large. Direct-to-home television, that's 120 billion, twice as large as that. You make money by providing value-added services. As cool as hardware is, that's not how you make the money. So the interesting model of course, Planet Labs, for example, or Astrobotics is they're focusing on the service that they can deliver to that end user.
So are we going to continue to think of space as an industry, or are we going to think of it as an extension of some other service platform, some other information platform, a big data, extension, whether it's in space, whether it's in high altitude balloons, whatever, sort of agnostic as to getting to that ultimately customer or business focused, end user. Is that where we think that, space will become a tool in that kit? Is that a question?
So I look at it as space is now open for technology companies. And Planet is built as primarily a data company. And that's our first mission, is to provide daily images of the whole planet. And we're finding there's tremendous value in recording our planet at that cadence. So I think we will continue to see, whether it's into communications or many other applications that are on the horizon for new approaches to space, that we'll see that these companies are not just hardware companies in space. They're more a specific service for the user and providing some new tool that wasn't possible before at much greater scale for all of humanity.
Yeah, and I'll add to that space platforms, satellites, what have you, are simply nodes in a network. They're nodes in the network of moving bits, okay? They're not the be-all and end-all. The innovation is great, the technology is great, but they are one node in a very large network, as Planet Labs has shown. They want to be able to take pictures. They want to be able to deliver pictures to the end user. How they do that, now they've gone and purchased Rapid Eye, and completely changed the types of products they offer. So when we look at satellite companies, even the large geocommunications companies, the satellite is simply a node in a communications network. The product we offer, the space insurance, yes, happens to be very specialized to that node, to that particular platform, but I would say that to echo what Ben was saying, it's simply a piece of the puzzle.
I'll add to that. I think that the space is not the industry, right? Transportation is the industry, or Earth observation is the industry, and these vehicles that we're developing, you think of them as vehicles, but really they're providing a service, or they're providing a product that you're delivering. And that's really key to being able to build a business or accomplish a task. You're not trying to develop space necessarily. You're trying to solve a problem and provide value.
It looked like we had a question from the audience. Did you want to present?
I was just wondering, this is mostly for Chris, how the insurance industry has reacted to the SpaceX accident.
There have been a number of launch failures in the last 12 months, at least 4 of them. And our reaction is always the same. Failures are inevitable. We don't expect there will never be failures. We expect failures, and quite honestly, failures keep me working. Nonetheless, what's very important to us, whether it's the the Antares, the Proton, the Soyuz, or the Falcon 9, the most important thing for us when we look at a failure and its effects is how it's handled. There's the process. What's the failure investigation process? Is it a fault tree? Is it some other method? How thorough is it? How deep does it go? Secondly, and very importantly, is who have you brought in from the outside to make sure that you've captured everything that you should be capturing? Okay. The third thing is what's the root cause? Not just the root cause, but the contributing factors. What have you determined is the most credible failure mode? What were credible failure modes, but not as credible? And what was deemed non-credible? Because that will show us, that'll demonstrate to us the depth of the investigation. So failures are inevitable. We wouldn't wish them on anyone. We've been dealing with a lot of them in the last 12 months, and really in the last 30 years that I've been in this business. There's never been a period when there have not been any failures in a year. So we expect them. We don't know when they're going to happen, but we write a portfolio of insurance so that the losses of the few are paid by the many. Everyone pays into the pot, and those who have losses take out. But again, the most important thing for us is the conduct, the process of the failure investigation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So we've been spending some time at a macro level talking about risks and rewards. I want to get a little bit into the mindset and into the personality of the entrepreneur and the startup. And so maybe I'll start my question with you, Kevin, and then Ben, feel free to jump in. But in your view, what is the most important personality that an entrepreneur needs to possess in order to strike the right balance between mitigating risk and capitalizing on opportunities?
So I ties really well into the question that was just asked. Entrepreneurs are innovators in sometimes technology, but really in business. And we use the word failure a lot. But if you're innovating and if you're creating something new, issues are inevitable. These launch vehicle failures happen. But the reality is if you try to be completely risk averse, you'll stagnate. You don't innovate. You don't get past those breakpoints. And so to me, the fundamental personality aspect of an entrepreneur is someone who's willing to look at those risks, to take them on, and to accept a little bit of failure in order to get to the ultimate goal.
I come from a pretty risk tolerant life, I guess. I was a big rock climber, climbed El Capitan a whole bunch of times, and got really into speed climbing, where you really have to bring one rope, have the only way to get off the rock is to go up and climb several thousand feet, and really be very precise as far as how much water you have, how much risk you're taking, how much you're able to protect yourself. And you get in situations where you've been climbing for 20 hours or so and you're shaking and the most scared you've ever been, and have been out of water for 6 hours, and having to control yourself and make the best decisions in those sort of instances. I think I learned a lot from that helped me survive the couple of years of building hardware at Planet Labs. Because it was a lot of very hard decisions that needed to be made very close to when we were shipping hardware, and that an entire flock of satellites depended on. So I think that sort of risk tolerance and that ability to see through all the many problems that are going wrong and find the solutions and find find the way out of those troubled situations. I think that characteristic has helped a bunch.
I want to add to that. My business is not as dramatic as Ben's, nor have my life choices been apparently as dramatic as Ben's. But I run my own company for almost 15 years, and you know, we've been through up times and down times, and I really do think that, to me, the core feature is, if you look around a room and think, oh, this is bad, who should decide what we're doing? If you are that person that has one answer to that question, who should decide? Me. I'd rather it be me. No matter how much those folks know, I'm going to be more comfortable if it's me making the decision. That, to me, is the core.
So we've got one over here.
Yeah. So you were talking earlier about the difference between being a data or transportation company and being a space company. One of the traditional risks of space companies has been being displaced by other technologies, whether it's communications or observation platforms or whatever. So how do, both for Astrobotic and Planet Labs, how do you think about the risk of drones displacing space assets or other being displaced in other ways by maybe larger providers or other platforms? And how do you put that into the way you think about your business plans?
I'll go first. We think of it as there's so much data needed to quantify our Earth and to help us make better decisions and to help us protect Earth and help all of life on Earth, that drones are part of the solution. You're going to get higher resolution images and persistent monitoring of a small area with drones. As far as what we're trying to provide is daily image of the whole Earth, and that does not seem as feasible with drones. So it's all complementary. And then as far as communications, there's certain communications that from space will be better, and then there's parts of the solution that will be ground-based. So I think it all is complementary, and as space becomes, as there's greater access and new approaches that are lower cost, then new opportunities become competitive as well.
So I think we're in a little bit different situation than Ben. To get to the moon, you got to fly, and so we're not going to be replaced in that way. But competition is fundamental to any kind of business, and if there's no competition, you're in the wrong field because there's nobody interested in what you're doing. So we look at competition as both a risk and also a healthy sign that that things are going well and that we're in the right place. And one of the interesting things about the moon right now is there actually is competition. So that's a sign of a market. There are always going to be things that come up in the future that you don't anticipate. There's future technology out there. In our case, somebody could come along and invent a new type of vehicle, a new type of propulsion system, and it's our job to anticipate those as much as we can, and then when they come up, hold a strong position and be able to hopefully take advantage of new technology and things like that.
I'll add a little bit to that and say that I keep mentioning the big geo operators. There are about 50 there are 50 geo satellite, commercial geo communication satellite operators around the world. And that number has grown over the years. But the interesting thing is, in my 30 years in the business, almost none of them have actually gone out of business. Of course, there have been plenty of mergers, plenty of acquisitions, that sort of thing. But companies of that scale tend not to simply disappear after an investment that large. The interesting thing we're seeing, though, is in this new world, we have started to see companies who have started down the path of being a space company and being a client of ours who have fairly quickly disappeared. So it maybe maybe there's something to that now in this new paradigm.
Thank you.
We have another question over on this side here.
I have a question for Planet Lab, and anybody else can answer it. I have a question about imaging. And you brought it up as a rock climber. I'm an instructor for Outward Bound and companies like that, to teach backpacking and rock climbing. Very obsessed with maps, especially when I'm lost and I'm guiding a group of people. Right? So I'm very fascinated with maps. It's great that we have Google Maps. They just did the really cool El Capitan interactive feature. But that, I'm really loud. Is it on? It's dead. It's not loud. I think microphones make me quieter, actually. That's totally fine. All right. Okay. Is that working? Yeah. So maps. I just had a conversation with a group of students at Singularity University last night, where I met a group of friends for dinner. They're in the current class. We're talking about maps. From space, it seems super rad and really cool. You have these top-down maps, but as you probably know, maybe other people know that spend a lot of time in the outdoors, it's no good when you're looking at your actual navigation view from the ground, right? The desert, if I'm standing in the desert, it looks, a formation looks very different depending on which side you're standing on it, right? So what are the options from space when you're taking all these pictures? Is it possible to get imaging that would work at the eye level, or the top-down level? You're missing huge formations. It just doesn't work the way our eyes work and what we actually need.
Good question, thank you. There are ways of doing that. There's synthetic aperture radar. There's also getting images from multiple angles to create perspective. As far as our model and our resolution, we're capturing more things that change, and a lot of what has been mapped as far as terrain and size of buildings, a lot of those don't change on a daily basis as much. So yeah, there are ways of getting perspective, and I think that's not specifically what we're working on right now. But there's also plenty that you learn from up-to-date imagery as far as maps like changing conditions, changing rivers, changing infrastructure, agriculture and forests being changed. You can see a lot of change happening daily.
I want to throw a question actually over to Kevin. When you're looking at landing on the moon, what are you doing for 3D maps?
It would be great if Planet Labs could put a satellite up there and there's no atmosphere, you could just look. We're using LRO data primarily to plan the mission, but at the end of the day, that's only a certain resolution, and we're going to get to the surface of the moon. Fundamentally, what we're trying to do is enable people to make discoveries that you don't know ahead of time what you're going to find. Our first mission is to a pit that's subsurface. There is no data. You could take a radar, but that's a lot of mass. So we'll be exploring, and we're taking advantage of what's there, but we're going to make some new data, and we're probably going to get lost. It's going to be a pretty good adventure.
So Ben, I liked your example of kind of putting it all out there in the rock climbing example, and I wanted to get, this isn't necessarily a question for you, Ben, but for the group, as you know, one of the pivotal images of my youth is the Challenger disaster, and space is risky, and the risk profile is different when you're talking about human beings, human life at risk. how has and my question is sort of forward thinking, is the risk tolerance going to change when we start having, citizens entering into low Earth orbit on space tourism? When we have human beings playing more of a role in space, will the risk profile change, or are we going to get away doing more with robotics, such that we're doing more, taking the human being out of the equation so that we can have a market that's not driven really by sort of pride of humans landing on the moon, but actually driven by the science that we can learn because a rover can do it just as well? I open that up to whoever wants to start with that question.
So my background's robotics, but at the end of the day, why are you exploring the moon? Why are you flying satellites around the Earth if it doesn't benefit humanity, if it doesn't get back to people at the end of the day, right? It's critical for us to allow a little bit of risk in human spaceflight. It's a challenging thing to do, but most of the exploration in the world occurred and most of the advances occurred when people took risks, when people went across the ocean. Some of those people did die. Robotics plays a role in reducing those risks as much as we possibly can. It plays a role in doing the exploration and testing out systems and finding the places where an astronaut might die and reducing that risk. But at the end of the day, in order for us to innovate, in order for us to really move forward, we have to take those risks.
We've done a analysis of, for example, the market for suborbital tourism launches, people paying $100,000 to $250,000 to fly up to the edge of space, or not quite the edge of space as company plans evolve, but and looked at the risks associated with that. Of course, there was the Virgin Galactic accident some months ago. Whenever you do a study of market demand or trends, you always get asked what would be the consequence of an accident. Would that kill the market? Would the market just shut down? And I think that is very unrealistic and very much not the case. I think that if you look at any major mode of transportation today, or if you look at adventure sports that have some physical risk, we've got the poster child here for taking risks. There's a degree of acceptance of risk and that degree of acceptance is mediated through the lens of the appropriate behavior of the companies or actors that are operating or organizing the service. So if there appears to be negligence, if there appears to be irresponsibility, then that level of risk becomes intolerable. But we as a society and a community and an economy are very accepting of a certain degree of risk to human safety associated with different activities. And I don't think there's any reason why we would expect that space would be different. And in fact, I think space gets, at this time, space is put into that category of volitional and very highly uncertain with an expected relatively high degree of risk. If the investigation into the Virgin accident turned up that there was some malfeasance, that would generate one, and I certainly don't expect that to be the case, that would generate one set of reactions. But to date, the reaction has been sadness and seriousness, but it certainly has not been stop, far from it, from any community that I've seen.
And from the insurance point of view, we don't think any business are acting in a cavalier manner. We go on that assumption. There's if you include X-15 and all that, there's been over 60 years of space flight. So there's a lot of experience. A lot of people have gone into space, and there's a lot of study that's been done on human factors. In fact, I just taught yesterday at the ISU in Ohio, and they have a subgroup there at the school this summer on human factors that's studying it very intensively and doing a lot of projects on it. So there's a lot of attention being paid to the human factors aspect of it. And from an insurance company's point of view, we rely on the fact that there has been a lot of work on it. We rely on the fact that it's space is dangerous, but it's a lot of dangerous activities that we take on every day. I mean, you wouldn't catch me dead on the face of El Capitan like Ben was, but I might go up in a rocket. So it's a matter of degree. It's a matter of perception. Perception plays a big part in it, and it's a matter of the fact that so few people, while many people have been into space, it's still a small number. So I think that as time goes on and we see that companies who are involved in carrying people to space take it very seriously, I think a lot of those concerns will be mitigated.
So I think we have time for one more question. The gentleman over here has been.
Hi, Enzo Vito. Kind of a little bit of background on my question. I'm going to give an example from the tech space since we are in Silicon Valley. Airbnb is a website people can go on to and like rent out places to stay. And Airbnb in their earlier stages, they would go like house to house, signing people up. And now that they've grown globally, I don't expect Brian Chesky to be going, house to house. So short of doing that, what can startups or space startups do? I guess risk-wise, what can they do that doesn't scale? What can they do that doesn't? Yeah.
So I don't know who wants to take that first. I mean, usually when you think of technology companies, they all want to scale. So in what sense exactly? What can they do to shoot themselves in the foot so that they don't scale?
Well,
lots of things.
I think with your example, Airbnb started in with a very manual process of getting customers, and then moved to a more automated process that would scale, that the whole world could use. I think that's a lot of the approach we used is we started writing very simple software and building the satellites by hand, and they were very hard to work on. And just each time you iterated to a point of automating and making it scale. And so now last week we had 14 of our doves released from the International Space Station, and all of those were contacted pretty quickly, largely manual process of those getting updated software. There were some new manufacturing changes on a sensor that caught right away in manufacturing, and we caught that in software. We're able to adjust it. So it's really automating everything you can and really pushing towards scalability. And when you've built a couple of satellites and you start really questioning yourself and saying, okay, how would we build 30 of these in the same amount of time, and making those changes to enable it. And then also, okay, it took us 5 people to commission this first satellite. How do we get it so we can do 100 of them with one person? So really trying to build the business in that direction.
When you start a company, you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what your market is. You have an idea, right? But you're going to go out and try something. And if you don't try something, you will fail, right? You just don't get over that hump. And so what often happens is you go out and you try something that doesn't scale because you need to test your technology. You need to answer the question, what do I really need to solve? And I think Ben's case is pretty explicit. In our case, we started with business models that didn't scale. In Airbnb's case, they just had to get out there and get some customers, and that's fundamental, right? You got to get out there and get customers. In the beginning, you can do things that don't scale because you got to get the first one.
And there's also, and this is a benefit of the new space movement, such as it is. They're increasingly, I think, you can engage opportunistically. You can look for a launch opportunity that's not replicable. You can build satellite hardware. The fact that you can in your kitchen work on a CubeSat is extraordinary compared to the opportunities you would have had to actually build space-capable hardware even. You can look at developing the software side or the analytics side for space data, even if you don't have hardware to generate it. So you can opportunistically look at pieces of the model, and I think that the important thing is do something. Try it, create it, experience it, go. Do it. Be a good model.
Well, great. Well, this has been a great discussion. I, again, want to thank all of our panelists for spending time with us this afternoon. On that note, I think we'll end this panel. I did like the building CubeSats in your kitchen because that brings Sean Casey back. But I actually think that you deserve more than just a round of applause. I think you actually deserve a chance at a prize. So I'm going to introduce my good friend Sean Casey, who's with the Silicon Valley Space Center, who's going to speak for a moment or two about a new effort that we're starting up here in Silicon Valley that we hope all of you will want to become involved with. So Sean, if you could come up and give a speech and maybe tell us where you got that shirt.
Absolutely. So aside from wearing another hat, I'm also wearing another shirt. This is actually what entrepreneurs in Ghana wear. I do a stint over at Clara University Global Social Benefit Incubator. They bring in companies from around the globe, and this is one of the entrepreneurs that makes paper products out of banana pseudostem. So I was thinking, I was involved in a startup and all I got was this t-shirt. But aside from that, as John mentioned, we have a new group here in the Bay Area. It's the Society of Satellite Professionals International. It's a well-known international organization with chapters all around the United States and also abroad in the UK and Europe. And so today, this summer, we're opening a Silicon Valley chapter, and I would encourage everyone that's here that's in Silicon Valley to join, and certainly everyone that's here at this meeting to consider joining the SSPI. If you go to sspi.org, get a membership. Here in Silicon Valley, we're going to do a number of events. We've got events scheduled for September and December. We also are working on building our scholarship fund. So if you're a corporate entity, I would encourage you to come talk to me about SSPI and corporate memberships. And with that, we're also going to have a February event over at Hogan Lovells, and John can tell you a little bit more about that at the right time. So that being said, come talk to me about SSPI, the program, and what I have is a fishbowl with business cards in it.
To look at it with objectivity and with rigor, and to provide insight into what's happening. And one of the lenses that I've always used for that from the beginning of my career, which was very close to some of Jim's policy discussion, although I was trying to look like I didn't know what he was talking about. What policies? But I lived through most of those policies. So the lens has been the lens of commercial space. And commercial space used to mean the Office of Commercial Space at NASA spent a lot of time deciding what their pricing policy for the many companies that wanted to use space station was going to be. That was the kind of big issue that we were grappling with at the time. Spoiler alert, there were hardly any. But it was clear at that point, and now is the culmination of that, that industry and companies and entrepreneurship was going to have an enormous effect on the way the space industry played out. And so there are three trends that affect risk and opportunity right now that I wanted to sort of highlight. And the first one is very obvious to everybody in this room, but I think it has some interesting nuances, and that is increased participation by high visibility, high net worth individuals, the Space Billionaires Club. So there's an obvious benefit of that or impact of that, which is that those deeper pockets reduce the risk of running out of money or running out of runway. Interestingly, I think there's another layer, which is that the previous successes of those entrepreneurs, and they typically have not been people who have made money in space, those previous business successes carry credibility, and I think really importantly, they shape the media response and the media coverage and the public response to those individuals and to those businesses. So there's already a difference from someone who's identified with the space industry starting a company and someone who's identified with, for example, Amazon or PayPal. And I think the consequences of that is that their involvement has begun to change the view of space investment as being something that's unique.
Startup. Next, feel free to give your applause. All right. Next, we have Bill Haldeman with Planet Labs. Ben works in strategy and launch at Planet Labs. Ben led the design of the instrument payload used on Planet's imaging satellites and has flown approximately 100 payloads in space. Prior to Planet, Ben created the first global robotic telescope network at the Las Cumbres Observatory Global Telescope Network. This network enabled persistent tasking of the night. Chris Kunstadter is a senior vice president of XL Catlin and manages XL's space insurance portfolio. He is actively involved in all aspects of XL's space business, including technical, financial, and actuarial analysis, policy wording construction, claims handling, and business development. Chris is a leader in promoting risk management awareness in the space industry, being involved with numerous failure review boards for satellites and launch vehicles, as well as developing and exploiting satellite salvage opportunities. In addition, he has worked closely with satellite operators, launch providers, and government agencies to enhance industry understanding of space situational awareness issues. Let's give a hand for Chris. And last but not least, Kevin Peterson. Kevin Peterson manages Astrobotics technology development and strategy. Kevin has fielded a dozen autonomous land, air, and sea. His vehicles pilot themselves autonomously over rugged desert roads, through traffic, and for months on the ocean. Kevin was the technical lead for Carnegie Mellon's DARPA Grand Challenge teams. At Astrobotic, Kevin is the architect of the Griffin lunar lander.
And we're going to pass this around, and if you're interested, our prize is going to be a Arduino module from our friends at Spire. This is an ArduSat module kit. It's got all the sensors in it associated with ArduSat, so this is going to be our prize. So even if you'd like to take this home and use it somewhere else, that's okay as well, but we'll pass the fishbowl around and you can throw your business cards in there, and then I guess at the end of the event we'll do a drawing.
Yes, so that's our hook. We're going to keep you here till the end to do the drawing. So, if you want to wake up at that time, feel free to do so. So, I was trying to think about how to introduce this topic, risk and opportunity, and I was thinking that an alternative title, NewSpace meets Chinese philosophy. And you're probably scratching your head and thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? Well, consider the following definition. In Chinese philosophy, yin-yang describes how apparently opposite or contrary forces are actually complementary, interconnected, and interdependent in the natural world, and how they give rise to each other as they interrelate to one another. So before you today is a distinguished group of panelists that will present their views on how these seemingly opposing considerations of risk and opportunity are shaping NewSpace, and how individual entrepreneurs can find their own appropriate balance between risk and opportunity. So it is in this context that I have the pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, Carissa Christensen is a co-founder and managing partner of the Tari Group, a space and defense consulting firm based in Alexandria, Virginia. She is a leading business and technology strategy consultant in the space and satellite industry and is a sought-after speaker and author. She also advises several companies she has helped seed and serves as the chair of the board of QX Branch, a quantum computing software and analytics, and leads the decision-making that balances risk and reward in technical development. Thank you to all our panelists for being here. Before we get started with the Q&A, I'd just like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to say in their own words a few things about what they're doing, what drives them, and what they see as exciting opportunities and risks in the new space industry. We can start with you, Carissa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, John. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. This really is commitment, as John said, Saturday afternoon after lunch. And it's a fantastic topic. In thinking about risk and opportunity, I think the place that I start is with my sense that, as John said, think about what you want to say about yourself. And I thought, well, gosh, you know, I'm an entrepreneur in this community. It's so ingrained in my experience and the space industry, starting a company and doing that job, that I tend to focus more on what the job is. But there is risk and opportunity is certainly at the core of making that decision. I'll say that I generally subscribe to the idea that entrepreneurs are not necessarily more risk-seeking than other people, but that they are deeply knowledgeable about a topic, an area, a capability, an opportunity, a market, and that depth of knowledge enables them to be confident that they can provide a service or a product or engage in an industry in a way that will make them more successful than others. There's also a little bit of ego involved in that, but I do think that's a very interesting construct. So my day job, what I do at the Torrey Group is I analyze the industry. My job is to understand what's going on, to research and collect data,